During dinner that night, I sat quietly at the long oak table, my hands trembling as I reached for the water jug. My daughter-in-law, Chloe, sat across from me, swirling her glass of red wine like a queen waiting to be served. "Pour me more," she said, without even looking at me. I smiled faintly. "You've had enough, dear. Maybe switch to water?" That's when it happened. The glass slipped from her hand. No, she threw it. It hit the wall behind me, shattering into 1,000 sharp pieces. The room went silent. My son Ethan stood frozen. And I realized, in that single, humiliating moment, my son had changed, because instead of defending me, he said the words that shattered me. "Mom, please, stop provoking her." My name is Jean. I'm 58 years old, and I used to be a school teacher in Portland. For most of my life, I believed kindness was enough. That if you treated people with love, they'd do the same for you. But I was wrong. After my husband, Michael, passed away in a car accident, it was just me and my son, Ethan. He was only 10 then, with big brown eyes and a heart too gentle for this world. Those years after Michael's death were hard. I worked double shifts, took tutoring jobs at night, and skipped meals so Ethan could have his. But every struggle felt worth it because Ethan was my reason to keep going. He used to say, "Mom, one day I'll take care of you. You'll never have to worry about a thing." I believed him. I really did. Ethan grew into a kind, ambitious young man. He studied business, landed a great job, and slowly started building a life for himself. Every achievement of his felt like my own victory. Then one day, he called and said, "Mom, I met someone. Her name was Chloe." I remember our first meeting like it was yesterday. She walked into my house wearing designer heels that clicked against my old wooden floor. She smiled, a polite, practiced smile, and said, "So you're Ethan's mom. You must be proud he's dating up." I didn't know what she meant at first. But the way she said dating up told me exactly what she thought of me. Simple, small town, unimportant. Still, I tried to like her. I wanted my son to be happy. During dinner, I asked about her family. She said her father owned several real estate firms and her mother ran a fashion boutique. Then she looked around my little kitchen, the old curtains, the chipped teapot, and said softly, "This place is cozy." It wasn't what she said. It was how she said it. Ethan didn't notice. He was too busy looking at her like she was the best thing that ever happened to him. They got married 6 months later. The wedding was grand. Hundreds of guests, chandeliers, a string quartet. I wore a simple navy dress, the same one I'd worn to Ethan's graduation. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. At the reception, I overheard 2 of Chloe's friends whispering behind me. "Is that his mom? She looks like the Help." I smiled and kept walking, pretending I hadn't heard a thing, because that's what mothers do. We stay quiet so our children can have peace. After the wedding, Ethan moved into Chloe's family home, a big glass and marble mansion on the outskirts of town. The visits became less frequent. The calls shorter. At first, he'd call every weekend. Then once a month. Then only on holidays. Whenever I called, it always went the same way. "Hey, Mom, we're just heading out. Can I call you later?" But later never came. Still, I kept trying. I'd drop by with food, Ethan's favorite lemon pie. One day, I drove all the way to their new house. Chloe opened the door, holding a glass of white wine at noon. "Oh," she said, surprised. "We didn't expect company this early?" Ethan appeared behind her, smiling nervously. "Mom, you brought pie." Chloe looked at the dish and said, "That's sweet, but I don't really eat carbs." She said it with that same cold smile that didn't reach her eyes. They invited me in, but I could tell I didn't belong. Everything in that house screamed money. Marble floors, golden frames, shelves of expensive wine. And there I was, standing in my thrift store dress, holding a homemade pie. When I tried to help set the table, Chloe stopped me. No, Jean, please. We have staff for that." That was the first time she called me by my first name instead of Mom. Something inside me sank. Over the next year, things got worse. Chloe's tone became sharper, her patience thinner. Every time I visited, I left feeling smaller. Once, during lunch, she looked at Ethan and said, "You know, darling, it's cute that your mom still cooks like it's the 90s. Then she laughed. Ethan chuckled weakly. She just loves her old recipes. But he didn't defend me. Not once I started noticing things. Whenever I called Ethan, she'd answer instead. "Ethan's busy right now. Can he call you later?" That later again, it became their favorite word. I missed my son. The boy who used to sit on my lap and promise to build me a house one day, but that house he built, it no longer had a place for me. One night, I received a call. "Mom, Chloe, and I are hosting a small dinner this weekend. You should come." His voice sounded hesitant, like he wasn't sure if he wanted me there or not. Still, my heart lifted. Maybe things were finally changing. I spent the entire day cooking. Roasted chicken, baked vegetables, and of course, that same lemon pie. When I arrived, Chloe opened the door wearing a red silk dress, holding a glass of wine. She looked me up and down. "You actually brought food?" "We already have a chef, Jean," I just smiled. Old habits. During dinner, her friends filled the room with laughter and wine. I sat quietly, trying to keep up with their conversations about yachts and expensive trips to Europe. When the chef served dessert, Chloe looked at me and smirked. "So Jean, tell us, do you ever get bored living alone?" Her tone was mocking. I could feel her trying to embarrass me. I forced a smile. "Not really. I have my garden, my books, and my memories," she laughed. "Memories don't pay the bills, though, do they?" The table went quiet. Ethan shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. That was the moment I realized I was sitting at a table full of strangers, and my own son was one of them. After dinner, I got up to leave. As I picked up my purse, Chloe said loudly, "Next time, Jean, don't bring your food. We don't eat leftovers here." I froze. Her friends laughed softly. Ethan said nothing. He just avoided my eyes. That night, as I drove home, I cried harder than I had in years. Because for the first time, I felt like a guest in my son's life. Still, I told myself, "It's fine, Jean. Maybe things will get better." But they didn't. In fact, the worst was yet to come. That dinner, the one where she threw the glass at me, that was the night everything changed forever. That evening, I stood outside their grand house again, clutching a small gift bag in my trembling hands. I had told myself that this dinner would be different. That maybe, just maybe, Ethan and Chloe wanted to make peace. I even wore my favorite cream-colored dress, the one Ethan used to call my lucky dress. But as soon as Chloe opened the door, I felt the chill in her greeting. She gave me a smile so thin it could cut glass and said, "Oh, you actually came. How nice." I stepped inside. The air smelled like expensive perfume and roasted meat. The table was already set. Polished silverware, crystal glasses, candles flickering like tiny flames of mockery. Around the table sat Chloe's friends, all perfectly dressed, all sipping wine and glancing at me like I didn't belong there. Ethan walked in behind her, avoiding my eyes. "Mom, glad you could make it," he said softly, almost as if he was apologizing for something. Throughout dinner, Chloe was the star. She laughed too loudly, spoke too proudly, and filled her glass every few minutes. Her laughter became sharper as the night went on, her tone cutting through the air like broken glass. I stayed quiet, smiling when expected, answering politely whenever someone spoke to me. But inside, I could feel something breaking. She kept pouring herself more wine until the bottle was almost empty. Then, without even glancing my way, she said, "Jean, pour me another glass." Her voice wasn't a request. It was an order. I looked at her, calm but firm. "You've had enough, Chloe. Maybe switch to water?" The laughter at the table died instantly. Everyone froze, waiting for her reaction. Chloe's eyes narrowed. She tilted her head slowly and smirked. "Excuse me?" I repeated, "You should drink some water. You'll feel better tomorrow." Her hand tightened around the stem of the glass. She leaned forward, her voice dripping with venom. "You're in my house, Jean. If I tell you to pour, you pour." Before I could speak, she hurled the glass across the table. It smashed against the wall behind me, exploding into shards that rained across the floor. The wine splattered onto my dress like blood. The room went silent. I didn't move. My hands were shaking, my eyes stung, but I refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing me cry. Ethan shot up from his chair, but not to defend me. He turned to her. "Chloe, calm down." She crossed her arms and said, "Maybe your mother should learn her place." Those words, "Your mother should learn her place," they hit me harder than the glass. And then, as if the night couldn't get worse, Ethan turned to me. "Mom, please, stop provoking her." That was it. The last thread between us snapped. I slowly stood up. My voice was steady, even though my heart was breaking. "I didn't provoke anyone, Ethan. I just reminded your wife that respect goes both ways." Chloe laughed mockingly. "Respect? You came here uninvited and tried to embarrass me in front of my friends." I looked around at her guests, their eyes wide, pretending not to enjoy the drama unfolding. I took my purse and said quietly, "Enjoy your evening. I won't bother you again." As I turned to leave, Ethan muttered, "Mom, don't make this a scene." I froze. A scene. That's what he thought this was. My son, the boy I raised with love, was now siding with a woman who just threw a glass at me. I walked out of that house, my heels clicking against the marble floor. Every step felt heavier than the last. When I reached my car, I sat inside for a long time, staring at the steering wheel through my tears. My reflection in the mirror looked like a stranger, tired, humiliated, broken. On the drive home, I didn't turn on the radio. The silence was loud enough. The only thing I could hear was Chloe's voice echoing in my head. "Your mother should learn her place." But as the road stretched ahead, something inside me shifted. The pain started turning into something else. Something stronger. I wiped my tears and whispered to myself, "No, Chloe, it's you who needs to learn your place." That night, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the rain fall against the glass. Every drop reminded me of how much I'd given to that boy, and how little he remembered. I thought about all the sacrifices, the late nights, the meals skipped, the birthday gifts I couldn't afford back then. And now, this is what I got in return. By midnight, I made a decision. A calm, clear, deliberate decision. I wasn't going to let them walk all over me again. If they wanted to treat me like I was nothing, I'd remind them exactly who built everything they took for granted. When the morning light broke through the curtains, I didn't feel weak anymore. I felt awake, determined, ready. I made a promise to myself. They would regret every cruel word, every insult, every piece of humiliation they threw my way. And I would make sure they never forgot what happens when a quiet mother finally decides to fight back. When I realized my son and his wife had taken everything from me, my savings, my trust, my peace, something inside me changed. I had spent years being silent, believing that kindness would bring love back into my home. But that night, as I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the empty chair where my son once laughed as a boy, I made a decision. I wasn't going to cry anymore. I was going to make them understand what it means to lose everything they took for granted. The next morning, I put on my calmest face and acted as though nothing had happened. I told my son I wanted to help them manage their finances better. "You've always been careless with money," I said softly. "Let me take care of some things for you." He smirked, confident that he had already won. That was my first victory, his arrogance. He didn't even suspect that his own mother was setting a trap. Over the next few weeks, I quietly gathered every document, every bank statement, every property paper I could find. I met with a lawyer, someone discreet and loyal, and explained everything. Together, we built a plan that looked simple from the outside, but would change everything from the inside. I started transferring ownership of my old business shares, my small rental houses, and even the insurance policies, all back under my name. I told my son I was updating paperwork for tax reasons. He never questioned it. While he bragged to his friends about how smartly he handled my finances, I was rebuilding my independence in silence. Each signature felt like reclaiming a piece of my soul. Each document I signed behind his back felt like a quiet thunder, a storm that was growing stronger, waiting for the right moment to strike. I also began selling a few things, not out of desperation, but strategy. My old jewelry, a few antiques he didn't even know existed. They were enough to give me a small backup fund. With that, I secretly rented a small apartment across town under a different name. It became my safe space, the place where I could think clearly and breathe freely. Meanwhile, I continued my act. I cooked for them, smiled, and pretended to be grateful whenever they threw me a few kind words. Inside, I was counting down days, not to revenge out of hatred, but to justice out of love. Because sometimes a mother's revenge isn't to destroy her children. It's to make them face the mirror they've avoided for too long. The day finally came when I had everything prepared. The legal transfers were done, the funds were safe, and my lawyer had sealed every loophole they could exploit. Then I did something bold. I invited them to dinner, just like old times. The table was set beautifully, candles flickering softly, the air calm and almost forgiving. My son came in proudly, his wife beside him, both confident that they still controlled me. But that night, I served more than food. I served truth. After dinner, I handed my son an envelope. He opened it, expecting perhaps a check, but instead found legal papers, proof that everything was no longer his to claim. My savings were gone from his reach. The house was under my sole name, and every single property he thought was his had been reclaimed. He looked at me in disbelief. "What did you do?" he asked, his voice trembling. I looked straight into his eyes and said, "I did what any mother would do when her own child forgets who raised him. I reminded you that I am not weak. You took my money, but you'll never take my dignity." His wife tried to speak, but I calmly stood up, walked to the door, and said, "You both taught me how to survive without love. Now learn how to live without my help." Then I left. Outside, the cool night air hit my face, and for the first time in years, I felt free. It wasn't just revenge, it was justice. Quiet, patient, and powerful. After that night when I walked out of their house, I didn't look back. The air outside felt colder, but somehow it was cleaner too, like I had finally stepped out of a storm that had lasted for years. I remember standing under a streetlight, clutching my small handbag, feeling both broken and free at the same time. For weeks, I stayed silent. I didn't answer their calls or messages, not that there were many. At first, I think they believed I was bluffing, that I'd come crawling back, apologizing for causing a scene. But I didn't. Instead, I disappeared. Not out of weakness, but to rebuild. I moved into a small apartment near the coast. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. I painted the walls myself, bought secondhand furniture, and filled the shelves with flowers instead of regrets. For the first time in years, I woke up without feeling unwanted. The peace was quiet, almost too quiet at first. But slowly, I began to enjoy it. I took a part-time job at a local bakery. The owner, a kind woman named Martha, reminded me what respect felt like. She'd say things like, "You've got the warmest smile. Jean, customers love you?" And I'd laugh softly, wondering when was the last time anyone had noticed something good in me. In those long mornings kneading dough, I found myself again. The sound of the oven timer became a comfort. The smell of freshly baked bread replaced the scent of wine and anger that once filled my son's house. Sometimes I'd sit by the window, watching families walk by, and a small ache would bloom in my chest. I missed him, my son. But I also knew deep down that I couldn't save someone who didn't want to be saved. Months passed. I started to heal. My cheeks found color again, my laughter returned, and the world felt less cruel. And then one morning my phone rang. When I saw his name, Michael, flash across the screen, my hands trembled. I let it ring out the first time. But then it rang again. And again I finally answered. "Mom," his voice cracked. He didn't sound proud anymore. He didn't sound angry. He sounded small. I didn't say anything, I just listened. I messed up, he whispered. She's gone. Claire left. She took everything, Mom, every penny. There was a long pause. I could hear him breathing unevenly. Then, through the static, came the words I'd waited years to hear. I'm sorry. I felt tears sting my eyes, but I kept my voice steady. Michael, when you chose her over your own mother, you made a decision. Now you're living it, he broke down. I know, Mom. I know I was wrong. I just didn't see it then. Please, I need you. Those words, I need you, echoed inside me. All those nights I had begged for love, for kindness, and now here he was begging for mine. It wasn't satisfaction I felt. It wasn't victory. It was sorrow. The kind that comes from knowing life had to break him before it could teach him. I didn't answer right away. I just whispered, You had everything once. Not money, not houses, not cars, but love. You traded it for pride, he cried. I could hear his tears through the line. When the call ended, I sat in silence for a long time. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and gold, the same colors I used to see from the porch of the house I lost. Except this time, the view was mine. A week later, I saw him standing outside my apartment building. He looked nothing like the man who once yelled at me across the dinner table. His clothes were wrinkled, his eyes red and tired. When he saw me, he didn't smile. He just whispered, Hi, Mom. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then I said, Come in. Inside, we sat across from each other at my small dining table, the same kind I had once dreamed of replacing when I was living with him. He looked around quietly. This place feels peaceful, he said softly. I poured us both tea and we sat in silence. After a while, he started talking. Not with excuses this time, but with honesty. He told me how Claire had controlled everything, how she mocked me behind my back, how he had ignored every red flag because he didn't want to lose her approval. He said she drained the accounts, sold his car, and left without a note. All she left behind was debt and shame. As he spoke, I felt a strange mix of pain and pity. This was my son, the boy who used to bring me flowers from the garden, who once held my hand crossing the street. Now, he was a man who had learned the hardest lesson of all. When he finished, he looked at me and said, I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I don't know where else to go. I took a deep breath and said gently, You're right. Forgiveness isn't something you deserve. It's something I choose. He looked confused. I continued, and today I choose it. Not for you, but for me. Because holding on to the pain only kept me chained to what you did. His tears fell freely. Mom, I can't undo it. But I want to make things right. Please. Let me try, I nodded slowly. Then start by being honest. With yourself, with me, with life. That night I let him stay. We ate a simple meal, soup and bread. And as we sat together, I realized something powerful. Revenge had never been about punishment. It was about awakening, about showing someone the cost of their cruelty, not through hate, but through absence. For years, I thought revenge meant making him suffer. But seeing him now, broken but humble, I understood. The greatest revenge isn't destroying someone. It's watching them rebuild themselves from the ruins they created, and knowing you stood tall through it all. Over the next few months, Michael tried to change. He got a modest job at a hardware store. He visited often, bringing groceries or flowers, and never once asked for money. Sometimes we'd sit by the window, watching the sunset in silence. And every now and then he'd whisper, "Thank you for not giving up on me." And I'd reply, "Thank you for finally seeing me." One evening, he brought an envelope. Inside was a letter, handwritten, just like he used to write when he was a boy. "Mom," it said, "I can't change the past, but I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never feel unloved again." Tears filled my eyes. I folded the letter and kept it beside my bed. That night I realized my story wasn't about defeat. It was about strength, about reclaiming my dignity when others tried to take it away. When people ask me now if I ever regret walking away, I say no. Because walking away wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of my freedom. And if anyone listening to this feels trapped, disrespected, or unvalued, remember this: you don't need to destroy others to rise. You just need to choose yourself. Life after that day felt different. Calmer, slower, almost sacred in its simplicity. I no longer woke up with that weight in my chest, that endless question of, why wasn't I enough? Because I finally understood, I had always been enough. I was just surrounded by people who couldn't see it. Michael began visiting me every week. Sometimes we'd just have tea and talk about nothing. The weather, the bakery, the neighbor's cat that always stole my biscuits. Other times we talked about the past, the things we'd buried under years of anger and pride. He'd say, "Mom, I still can't believe I let things get that far." And I'd reply softly, "You were blinded, my son." But pain has a strange way of opening our eyes. One day, he came over with a small potted plant, a rose bush, still young but full of promise. He placed it by my window and said, "Let's grow this together." Something new, something honest. I smiled, and for the first time in years I felt hope bloom in my heart again. Months passed. The rosebush began to grow. Its first flower opened on a warm spring morning. I stood there, looking at it, realizing that in so many ways it reflected our journey, broken roots that still found a way to rise again. Michael had changed completely. He no longer spoke with arrogance or pride. He was humble, grateful, grounded. Sometimes he'd call just to say, "Mom, I love you." And each time I'd smile quietly, thankful that I had lived long enough to hear those words again. But I won't lie. The scars remained. Forgiveness didn't erase the past. It just made it easier to live with. There were days I'd remember the glass that flew across the table, the humiliation, the loneliness. But instead of pain, I felt strength. Because that moment, the moment they tried to break me, became the very reason I learned how to stand tall again. And I realized something important. Revenge had never been about making them suffer. It was about showing them the truth of who I was, and the strength they had underestimated. I built a new life, one where peace mattered more than pride. Every morning, I opened my window, breathed in the scent of the roses, and whispered to myself, "You made it." One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Michael came over with something in his hand, an old photo. It was of us, him as a little boy, holding my hand at a school event. His eyes were bright, his smile pure. He looked at the picture and said, "This is who I want to be again, Mom. The boy who loved you more than anything." I felt tears run down my cheeks. "Then be that boy," I said, because that's all I ever wanted. We sat there quietly, the room bathed in golden light, both of us holding the photo like it was a piece of our lost past. It was in that moment I realized my revenge was complete. Not because I destroyed anyone, but because I rebuilt myself. Because I became someone stronger, wiser, and free. And maybe that's what real power is. Not control, not money, not proving others wrong, but finding peace after chaos. So if you're listening to my story right now, and you've been hurt, betrayed, or pushed aside, please listen carefully to what I've learned. You don't need to scream to be heard. You don't need to fight to be seen. You just need to walk away, heal, and rise so high that your peace becomes your loudest revenge. There will come a day when the people who broke you will realize what they lost. But by then, you'll be too far ahead to look back. You'll be too full of life to care. As for me, I forgave my son not because he deserved it, but because I deserved peace. And today I'm proud of the woman I became. I'm proud that I didn't let pain define me. And I'm proud that I turned my story into strength. Every rose that blooms outside my window now reminds me, even after the harshest winters, life finds a way to begin again, and maybe that's the message I want to leave with you. You may be hurting today. You may feel unseen, unappreciated, or betrayed. But don't let that be your ending. Let it be your rebirth. Because one day, You'll look back and realize that every broken piece led you to the strongest version of yourself. And when that day comes, smile, because you didn't just survive, you transformed. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of your own strength, your own resilience, please make sure to subscribe to Jean's Stories, where every story is a journey of emotion, healing, and power. Because sometimes, the stories we hear help us find the courage to rewrite our own. Thank you for listening. This was Jean's Stories. Until next time, take care of your heart and never forget your worth.